23, the 22nd anniversary of the attacks on September 11th. And we have a very special guest with us here tonight. He is the former chair of the Republican Party from 2011, 2012,
Yeah.
and also was a candidate for state treasurer in 2008 when I first met him, as well as a candidate for governor in 2010 and 2016 in the Republican primary, and much more. A really interesting guy and somebody that has some interesting stories to share with us here today, particularly on 9/11. Alan Alley. Alan, welcome to the program.
Kevin, it's great to join you. And it's also nice to be with a Notre Dame grad. One of the things that as you know, Kevin, I went to Purdue.
Yeah.
And Purdue and Notre Dame, or at least Notre Dame is a rival of Purdue's. I don't know if Notre Dame even knows Purdue exists, but one of the things that always frustrated me is we're very big rivals with Notre Dame, but all the people I meet that went to Notre Dame are really good people, and you fall into that category, and it's very annoying that you want to hate the Domers, but you can't because they're all like good folks. So.
And we're really kind of just down a short I-65 trip, really,
Yeah.
Lafayette to South Bend. And we have also in common the fact that it's, they're pretty high-end schools, and Purdue, particularly in engineering, and small towns in Indiana.
Yep.
That are, college towns effectively.
Yeah. And Purdue's a pretty conservative campus, I'd say. I didn't realize it when I went there. I went from Philadelphia, and I realized it when I got there. It was kind of like, this is a little bit different than suburban Philadelphia, but I really, really enjoyed it and had a great time, and have enormous respect for what Indiana's done, what my friend Mitch Daniels has done in Indiana, and the institutions of higher learning, except for IU, of course.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody's allowed to dislike them.
Of course.
That's okay. Well, and I wore this under my
nice
thing for you. It was a little and you've got
I've got my Indianapolis Motor Speedway shirt on.
Nice. Yeah, I see the car collection in the background.
Yeah.
It's and I follow you on of course on Instagram too, and I get to see you get around to some of these car shows and races. And
yeah, I've always been a car guy. Granddad worked for Ford. He was one of the first $5 a day Ford employees. My dad went to the Ford Motor Trade School. My dad worked for Ford. I worked for Ford. That was my first job out of Purdue. So cars have always been important in my life, and important to America, and really, how our country grew post-industrial revolution. And I think personal transportation is a very, very important aspect of America, and think there's a very bright future for it as we go forward.
Well, and that is good to hear. During the times that you ran for office, I got to hear many of your speeches, and yet every time I talk to you, I learn something new and something interesting that I just didn't know, either about the country or you, or some of these industries that because you worked for Boeing at one time too.
Yeah.
I remember running into you not long after Boeing had some of its big troubles, and you had some interesting insights on that too. But it's, coming back to 9/11, I remember one of the first times I got to hear you, I think it must have been in 08.
Yeah.
And you related a story which you also posted on Twitter again today, about where you were and what happened that day.
Yeah. Yeah. A very unusual, I mean, we all had unusual experiences that day, but I was actually in Tokyo on business. Our company was growing rapidly. We were a very international business. I was at a sumo match that evening, which was the morning in New York, and came back to my room after the sumo match, turned on the television set, and live saw the second airplane fly into the Twin Towers.
Wow.
And it was like this completely surreal out of body experience, almost like I just couldn't, we all couldn't believe it was happening. But I'm also in this weird alien environment where I've just come from a sumo match of all things and back to my room. And then to be hit with this, um, it was very disconcerting, and I'm a long ways from home. I don't know. It was very hectic, as you know. The reports were coming in, and they were saying things like, "We don't know if this was on purpose or not." And being an engineer and an old Boeing engineer, it's like, of course it was on purpose.
Yeah. How
Airplanes,
planes don't just fly into
they don't
buildings.
just randomly fly into buildings,
No.
right? And certainly you don't get two airplanes flying into the same building at the same time. So of course it wasn't. It was an attack. And I didn't really know. I was sort of like a lot of us, you're sort of lost, right? Like, where is this going? What are we going to do? And I thought about something, and I reached into my pocket and kind of fished around and was hoping that I would find what I was looking for. And I pulled out a United States quarter, and I looked at it, and I said, "Gosh, I wonder if the words are still there." Because we've been going through this whole thing of, should we take them away or not? And sure enough, I found it on the quarter, and it said, "In God we trust." And for me, it was very comforting to know that pretty much all Americans, at least at the time, it probably doesn't say "In God we trust" on credit cards now, but
No.
certainly on our currency, but we all carried it around with us, like everybody, right? And it was very comforting for me to know. And I thought, gosh, a country that is so bold as to have every citizen carry around a medallion that says, "In God we trust," is going to be okay. And we'll figure it out. And it might not be okay right now, and it might not be okay for a few weeks, but we're going to get this figured out. And it made me feel much, much better. I hope we never take that away. And I recognize that to each person, the interpretation of God might be different, but it was really nice of me. It was really nice to remember that I live in a country that thinks it's so important that we put it on a medallion that we carry around with us all the time. So
Yeah, a country that's so powerful and yet has the humility to recognize on its own
yeah,
currency that it's not in charge.
yeah, it wasn't a hammer and a sickle, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't. It wasn't any militaristic thing. It wasn't a B-52 bomber. It wasn't, the American soldier. All things that it could have been, right? It could have been, but it said, "In God we trust." And I guess that was put on in the 1950s. Does that sound right? I
Yeah, good question. I know that there was a discussion in the 1950s about whether we should keep "Under God" in the pledge, but I think it
right.
might have been around the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was. And I haven't heard anything about taking it away recently, although with everything that's going on, it wouldn't surprise me if
Yeah.
if that was something that they tried to do. I would very strongly uh, be against doing that. And this is, I think, as you know, a guy that has lots and lots of different religions in my immediate family, including Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, Christian. I have a cousin that was ordained in the Vatican. I have a Jewish uncle, a Muslim grandfather. I mean, I have pretty much every religion you could possibly have. But one thing I've learned from all of my uncles and cousins of all these different religions is we're all Americans, and we all have the same underlying belief system, kind of the golden rule and in God we trust, and it's manifested differently in my different segments of my family, but they're all really good people and they're all really American. So
And what that means transcends the immediate politics or the government
yeah,
itself, right? Which I think is what that acknowledges. I've always worried that at some point somebody would turn government into the new God, that this is what we all had to go and ask for our rights from and sort of bow to. But that's what we fought to eliminate to found the country.
yeah. I was just today. I saw on one of my Facebook feeds that one of my liberal friends uh, made an allusion to that environmentalism is their god,
Hmm.
and um, it's a really interesting take, because if you're passing legislation because you believe that the data supports that position, and we have to come up with solutions, that's one thing. But if you're passing legislation because it's just your religion, your belief, that's not what the United States was all about. And if the right was chastised for passing laws based on religion, um, in this case, somebody on the left who espouses that their religion is actually environmentalism should be chastised the same way.
Well, especially when, as you said, it should be based on facts and data. Um, and it's even really based on theories, which are something that is forever subject to debate, which is actually the fundamental basis
Yeah,
of our Constitution, is that we always get to debate these things. You can't take that away.
yeah,
And I'm a little concerned actually nowadays that maybe there are people trying to take that away whenever they can.
yeah.
And we see examples of it all the time in the news. I'm a little concerned actually that I was curious what you'd think about this, because the justice system, there's a feeling that maybe it's not equal justice um, under the law for all, uh, especially when you can say, well, you get to have a First Amendment right or a Second Amendment right, and you don't.
Right.
Other person does not, you know.
Well, I think you probably remember, Kevin, that I got crosswise with the justice system when
Mm,
I ran for office, right?
yep.
And I ran a commercial where I said, "I'm Alan Alley. I'm an engineer. We look at things differently," and then went on to talk about my positions. And I got a letter from the Oregon Department of State and Land Surveying, Engineering and Land Surveying, or whatever. And they said, "We understand you made a claim that you're an engineer, and please explain that." I said, "Okay." So I sent him my resume, and I highlighted my engineering degree and my engineering awards and all the engineering things I've done, and working for Ford and working for Boeing and designing semiconductors and all this stuff. And they said, "Yeah, that's not exactly what we wanted. Are you a registered professional engineer?" Which is a tiny fraction of the total engineers that take the tests that are certified by the state to be a registered professional engineer.
Hmm.
You don't need to be one to work at Ford or work at Boeing, to design airplanes, to design cars, to design semiconductors. The only time you really need it is interfacing with the government, interestingly enough,
Mm,
sign off on a drawing, usually a construction drawing for a bridge or a building or something like that.
yep.
So I talked to my Democratic friends about it, and they said, "Oh, Alan, that's ridiculous. They're not coming after you." I got to go to a hearing where they were discussing my case. And sure enough, there's an assistant attorney general sitting there. Uh, I got to say my piece, and I remembered at the end of it, I said, the crazy thing here. Oh, and by the way, the potential fine was $500 per, no, $1,000 per occurrence. And this commercial had aired 500 times. So the fine was a potential $500,000 fine. And I could tell they were going to pin this on me. And I said, the crazy thing is that me saying that I'm an engineer is probably the most truthful thing a politician said during the last election.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
About themselves or anyone else.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's like really, really, really true. It's not like kind of sort of true. It's not like I got an associate's degree or anything else. And it ended up getting settled, but it went on for 3 years. Attorneys from DC got involved pro bono to help me out. It was, but you're right, Kevin. I mean, when the government, I've felt it, and you feel very, very helpless when it happens. And they have unlimited resources. They don't have to be right, right?
Yeah, that's
But
right.
the fact that they have unlimited resources can just destroy you.
They can be really wrong and actually still pretty much get away with it. We know during the Trump administration, we spent 4 years of Russia collusion. Turned out to
Mhm.
be not only completely bogus, but invented by his political opponent and then forwarded by corrupt people within the Department of Justice and the FBI, and even some of our intelligence services were engaged in this. And who's gone to jail for that? Even
Yeah.
though there's just no way that was actually legal and okay. It's certainly unethical. Um, there's another thing in our society that I think might be good to mention too, which is that we're seeing sort of the outside of the government entities that can kind of get away with things. In Portland, we have Antifa. Some people actually describe Portland as the capital of Antifa. And even though we used to see years ago, I remember actually during the Iraq War, there were big protests and people did crazy stuff, but lawlessness was not okay. And it certainly wasn't okay for people to just go around and just destroy parts of the city, much less do it for 100 days and then blame like the police and stuff. But there is a element of intimidation that exists if you don't have the right politics, and it doesn't have to necessarily come from the government. The government might choose to do nothing about it, though, and that's kind of dangerous. And I mean, you've seen some of this in political experiences over the years. They
Yeah.
kind of play for keeps, don't they?
Yeah, it's really sad. This whole sort of you don't agree with me, therefore you're canceled. And it's one thing for an individual to cancel you. It's another thing for the government and the media to cancel you.
To collude, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like you can't have a different opinion about something. I I've always felt that I need to defend my positions no matter who I'm talking to or where. So I don't know if you were there, but I debated Kit Sauber and Bradbury at the Sierra Club in
No, I didn't get to see that one.
yeah, so 1,000 people in downtown Portland at Portland State, sponsored by the Sierra Club, and Bradbury and Kit Sauber were there, and I was there. It was in the primary. Dudley decided not to show up.
And Sierra Club is not the most friendly venue for Republicans all the time. So you were going into a place where you expected to be
Yeah,
at a disadvantage or challenged.
yeah, and but my thought was, if I can't defend myself in front of the Sierra Club, I probably shouldn't be governor of Oregon.
Hmm.
There's a large
Yeah.
contingent of people in Oregon who are either aligned with or members of the Sierra Club.
Yeah.
And we talked about everything. We talked about fish, and we talked about climate change, and we talked about, and I presented my points of view in a thoughtful manner. I thought the reviews were pretty good. I mean, there's so many examples from it. One was we each got to ask each other a question. So my question to Bradbury and Kit Sauber were, you think CO2 is the biggest contributor to climate change? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to give you 3 sources of CO2, and I want you to rank them 1, 2, and 3. And the 3 sources are humans breathing, cows breathing, and all the cars in the United States. and just rank them 1, 2, 3. And they said, well, I can't, I don't know. I said, well, that's interesting because if you're regulating it, you probably should understand relative contributions of things like that to kind of set the stage for the problem. And it turns out the largest of those three is cows breathing. Number two is humans breathing. And number three is all the cars in the United States. And it's almost cows are twice as much as humans, and humans are twice as much as cars. Now, look, I'm not saying that CO2 in the atmosphere has no effect. All I'm saying is we need to understand the sources and sinks, the sources of CO2 and the things that absorb CO2
Yep.
to understand what we're dealing with here. And humans can change behavior. Animals can't really too much. So let's look at that, and then let's look at how we change our behaviors if we need to, and then what effect that has on our economy and what that effect has on feeding the population, getting people back and forth to work, that sort of thing. So it's very, very frustrating to me as somebody who is trained in engineering. I'm not claiming that I'm a registered professional engineer.
Yeah, just to let everyone know out
I was trained in engineering. It's very frustrating to me. In fact, I've thought about if I had been state treasurer, what I'd love to do is convene an international conference on CO2 sources and sinks. And the reason is that this has an effect on management of your portfolio, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oil stocks, energy stocks get affected by this. Renewable energy stocks get affected by this. Agriculture stocks get affected by this. And have an exhaustive discussion where people report out all of the sources of CO2, the magnitude of those sources, debate, like I just said, cows breathing. Well, let's figure it out and let's get a consensus around that. And then what are the sinks? What is absorbing CO2? The oceans absorb CO2. Trees certainly absorb CO2. To a tree, CO2 is life, right?
Yep. Along with all other plants.
To a tree, oxygen is a poison, right? So it's amazing to us that the Supreme Court of the United States has said that CO2 needs to be regulated because it's a harmful gas.
Yeah.
Right? Well, if the Supreme Court were trees, they never would regulate CO2 as a harmful gas.
They'd have a problem with oxygen.
Giddy up. They'd have a problem with oxygen.
Yep.
And again, I just want to bring these perspectives to the table so that we can have these discussions that aren't being had today.
And that's one of the reasons why we have things that are declared emergencies, I think, whether they are or not, but we've been bombarded with emergencies where they're really telling you, don't think, just do what we tell you. And that's actually not how our society is supposed to function or policy is supposed to be made. I said to my daughter, literally last night, she was telling me about a book, the reading in school, it talks about climate change. And I said, and she knows that I have my concerns about the way these theories have been put forward, the way they've been stated and used by politicians. I mean, they've had a problem. They've predicted 10 out of the last 0 climate apocalypses, like polar ice caps melting and stuff like that. And I said, but if they came to you and they said, you know what, the problem is we have too much oxygen, what would you say? And she laughed. And I said, it's not that funny, actually, because that CO2 is just carbon plus O2, the stuff you breathe. And so I said, really, we have to have a considered and deliberate dialogue about this. And that's a dangerous thing sometimes for folks that have an agenda.
Well, and I've flippantly sort of said to my friends, look, the solutions are there, right? We're going to have renewable energy that doesn't really burn fossil fuels. It's going to happen. I heard of one just the other day where they're taking methane, which is just CH4,
Hmm.
And then using pyrolysis, which is high temperature, high pressure, they're cracking off the carbon, and all you're left with is hydrogen,
Hydrogen. Yep.
right? And then you combine hydrogen with oxygen, whatever, and you get energy. You can burn the hydrogen.
Yep. In fact, they're talking about putting that through all the pipes
Yeah.
that now carry natural gas. That's the plan, at
So
least.
there's a zillion solutions. I mean, we have a zillion solutions. The question then is going to become, globally, what is the CO2 concentration that we're going to hold at, and who's going to decide it?
What's the
Because
right amount? Yeah. And what's
right,
the right weather, by the way?
right, because there are certain parts of the world that are thriving. Their whole because plants grow better with more CO2. There's places that are going to be growing things that they never could have grown before. And now you're going to go back to them and you're going to say, hey, wait a minute, Skippy, we have to go back to 1804 when you couldn't grow anything,
Yeah.
right? And so something's going to have to regulate that. And that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, because it isn't like the United States can decide we're going to have 325 parts per million and build a wall around the United States and we get 325 parts per million. That's a global issue. So I'm very, very confident we're going to be able to control pollution of all types.
Hmm.
Technology is going to solve it. It's already solving it. But then the next question becomes the geopolitical structures that we use to manage it.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And also, um, can we work with some of these countries in the world? Are they, you know, trustworthy, transparent? And it was interesting because you made me think of this when you mentioned about being in Tokyo. By the way, I was heading towards the airport. I was getting ready to
Oh
get on
yeah,
a flight
what
on
were you
9/11.
doing?
So I was, my brother and I were running a software startup company based in Palo Alto, and so I would fly down every week to San Jose. And he got up earlier than me and then called and said, as I was getting ready to go to the airport, he says, "You got to look at this. A plane hit the World Trade Center." I'm like, "Okay." So I turned it on. You see one, and while I was watching, boom, the
Oh
other
yeah,
one hits, and I'm like, "This is not an accident." And my first thought, and what you said about ramifications of this whole thing, like you're sort of lost for a few minutes,
yeah,
um, and it sinks in. My first thought is I better get to the airport because I'll bet there's going to be quite some delays, and I don't know how soon I'm going to get on my flight down to
yeah.
San Jose. You just think like right here, like
Right.
right in front of you for a few seconds, and I got on a shuttle going to the airport. Got 5 minutes down the road, the dispatcher got a phone call saying, "Take everybody home. No one's going to be at the airport today. A complete nationwide ground halt has been ordered." And it's like, oh, yeah, that does kind of make sense. And it's just, at first you're just thinking about how can I get through my life for the day. And then the next minute, everybody's life is like focused on one thing and trying to figure out how to get through that. But when you said you were in Japan, uh, I know you've also mentioned about trips that you've made to China.
Yeah.
It Something really struck me, a statistic I heard a number of months ago. In 2002 or three, when China joined the World Trade Organization, they weren't even in the top 10 economies in the world.
Right.
Um, by 2008, I think they were passing Germany. By 2010 or 11, they surpassed supposedly Japan, and they've been catching up to us since then. But nevertheless, the second largest economy in the world in less than 20 years.
Right.
And yet, this transformation that people were expecting, where they might become an open society, more accountable, maybe even democratic, and certainly not belligerent, that really has not turned out to be what was expected. And I remember you telling me a story after you had come back from a business trip.
Yeah.
which stuck with me, except it didn't sink in until years later what that meant when we now know about Evergrande and Country Garden and these huge real estate concerns that have
Mhm.
that are teetering on the edge of collapse, that dwarf any other real estate companies in the world. Um, all the empty buildings and structures that they built all over the place that you saw and
Yeah.
witnessed.
Yeah, so I started going to China basically in 2002 and was going on a very, very regular basis, probably up to 2016 or so. So through that whole process. And you I would tell people you can't conceive of the amount of economic activity that's going on and how fast things are getting done. And you think about it, you say, oh, it's a communist country. Well, if you kind of think about that, corporations are kind of communist entities from that standpoint.
Authoritarian, at
They're
least, right?
authoritarian,
Yeah.
top down. Yeah, they're shareholders, but the workers don't vote. The corporation makes an informed business decision and then says, "This is what we're going to go do." So when you meet with people in China, when you met with executives in China and government officials, the government official that ran the Department of Transportation was like the CEO of General Motors. I mean, they were a car person through and through. They get it, right? You meet government officials in the United States, they're clueless when it comes to manufacturing or engineering or the Department of the FAA administrator usually doesn't have any airplane background, right?
Yeah.
So it's very, very different. But in some ways, once you change your paradigm to say it's not like a government, it's really like a giant business, it's like, oh, okay, now I get it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So if they say we need an airport, they just go, boom, boom, airport,
Yeah.
right? We need more power plants. They just go power plant, power plant, power plant, power plant. Oops, coal's dirty, nuclear, 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 nuclear.
Yeah.
And so fascinating to be there. But some of the things, I'll tell you, one of the most interesting stories that sort of teaches you about life, because in China, there were 1.3 billion people. 300 million, the 0.3 are sort of connected economically. They're the ones that have moved into the 21st century. And there's a billion peasants. And the peasants are really peasants, like almost homeless people here.
Yeah.
Like no economic cohesion at all.
Just their families and whatever they're living,
Kind of
subsisting off.
roaming around.
Yeah.
So we're in rural China driving on a brand new freeway. That was another thing. If they need a road, they just went road, straight line between two places. We're driving along on this freeway early in the morning, and there's a truck driving down the median, the side of the road, picking up bags that looked like trash bags. But they were pretty, I mean, 1 a mile or so, something like that. And the road is immaculately clean. And I said to the driver, "Wow, that's amazing. You guys are really taking care of this, but there aren't that many cars out here. Where did all that trash come from?" Right? Because and he said, "Oh, that's not trash. Those are bodies." And I was like, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, this road is new, and the peasants at night will come out and sleep on the road because it's warm. And then the trucks come through in the morning and kill them. And then they kind of get off to the side of the road. And then we have to go through and package them up and haul them away." And it was just very matter of fact, right? And those silly peasants, they just don't understand, but they'll learn soon enough. And so I tell that story not because I'm trying to say what a bunch of evil people, but we can't understand the paradigm of life and democracy and how you run a country compared to the United States. You just can't wrap your head around it. That an average citizen would just think, oh, yeah, well, they're peasants. And, that's a shame for the peasants, but we got to get on with it, right?
That
So,
probably reflects more of how human history has been too. We're sort of
yeah.
United
Oh,
States
yeah.
is this sliver of history that
Right.
maybe established a more of a value for life. But I mean, you look back into Europe in the Middle Ages. I mean, they'd have plagues, and it's like, well, it's like that old Monty Python skit, "Bring out your dead," and they would just move. It was funny in
Yeah.
Monty Python, but it actually was kind of true.
Well, and so when I'd have conversations with government officials about democracy, first of all, uh, rewind to going to a national museum in China, and they have these bronze cooking pots with the three legs, cooking pot, three legs. And they'd say, oh, this one's 1,000 years old, and this one's 2,000 years old, and this one's 4,000 years old, and this one's 6,000 years old. This one's 8,000 years old. Bronze. They all look the same to me, right?
Yeah, not
And
a lot of
and I'm
progress
like,
on bronze there.
and I'm like, 8,000 years? And they go, well, yes. I said, well, where was the archaeological dig that you dug that up? And they looked at me like, why would somebody bury a cooking pot? And it was known. They didn't do it on purpose. It just happened over. And they go, no, it's been passed down from mother to daughter to daughter to daughter to daughter for 8,000 years.
Yeah.
And our sense of history is what, 300? Something like that.
Yeah.
And theirs is 8,000, right? So you got to get that paradigm too. And so we'd talk about democracy and they'd say, so when did you let people other than white landowners vote? Say, well, when did you let women vote? Well, it wasn't that long ago, about 100 years. And to them, 100 years is like not yesterday. It's like an hour ago.
Yeah.
Right? So the point that they'd make is you let people vote when they became economically linked so that the decisions that they'd make are reasonable decisions for the entire linked economy.
Yeah.
I'd say, Alan, you've seen our peasants. You wouldn't let 1 billion peasants vote to determine the direction of our economy because they're not linked. They're completely separate. It's like a separate country or a separate place.
Yeah.
It's peasant, right? So they said once we get everybody economically linked, then I'm sure that other things will happen. And the time frame for linking everyone isn't 5 years or 10 years. It's generations. It's multiple generations.
Now they've done quite a lot in 20 years, admittedly. But then there's been something going on for maybe the past 9 or 10 years that feels like maybe they've taken a few steps back potentially,
Yes.
especially, and I was curious what you think about Hong Kong. I mean, a lot of us are
Yes.
pretty shocked that because did they understand this goose laying golden eggs in Hong Kong? Because it doesn't seem like President Xi, who I believe as a teenager actually lived in a cave during the Cultural Revolution,
Yeah.
fully appreciates what Hong Kong was. I don't know if it
Right.
is still.
Well, another thing that I realized was in 2002, China needed trade with the rest of the world in order to be economically successful. There wasn't enough economy
In China. Yeah.
So they had to have Intel fabs and Apple, assembly houses and this kind of stuff. And I literally saw between 2002 and 2016 that by 2016 they didn't care anymore. They didn't really care about making phones for the United States, or we taught them everything about manufacturing. And their economy was growing so fast. It was why do I need to worry about trade with anyone else?
Mm.
when I can just service my own economy. Another observation was people my age, when I'd meet them, the first words out of their mouth are, "Hey, how are my Tar Heels doing? Are they going to make the NCAA, tournament this year? Boy, I love my Tar Heel basketball." They all went to school in the United States,
Oh yeah.
and they all, the people my age, and they all loved the United States.
Hmm.
They loved our culture. They loved basketball. They loved American football. They loved being here. So there was a fondness and an aspiration to, we were like the big brother. I want to be like the United States. The next generation, the ones that are sort of, in their 40s and 50s, they didn't go to school in the United States
Oh
because China built a university
yeah.
system in China. They don't know about Tar Heel basketball. They don't know about country music. They don't know about, living in the United States, and they didn't go to school here. So they're very focused on China and very internally focused, and have a lot of pride about how great and powerful China can be, but they don't have this tempering that the guys and gals, mostly guys in my generation, had,
Yeah.
which is another dynamic that we're dealing with now. They don't feel like they need to be part of the global economy as much.
Well, and I think President Xi has actually tried to appeal to that a lot because I mean, there's obviously some economic problems we're experiencing right now, and they need to appeal to people's sense of patriotism. Do you think that
Yeah,
he'll take it as far as trying to do something with Taiwan? And because they've actually not the United States, we haven't been that persuasive. Certainly, President Biden has not
yeah,
been, but China has been persuasive of Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the Philippines in particular. They all have very different attitude towards China in just the last couple of years.
yeah. I think it's a very dangerous situation for many reasons. When I first went there, I came back. I said, "Look, we're never going to get in a shooting war with China because the best missile defense system is Intel fabs, Apple factories, and McDonald's. Because we're not going to bomb Intel fabs, Apple factories, and McDonald's.
Hmm.
When we're that economically linked, we're not going to mess with that. But as we've disengaged and less linked economically, now China's kind of like, yeah, I don't, the downside isn't as bad as it once was. There's loss of life, but I just gave you a description of what they think of life.
Yeah.
Um, and they view Taiwan as a rogue province. They view Taiwan as Florida, really.
Mm.
And maybe Texas is a better example. Nah, Texas is too big. They view Taiwan as a rogue province, maybe like Russia views Crimea, or maybe not even the whole Ukraine.
Yeah.
So I think China just feels that it's inevitable,
Hmm.
that it will be reunited,
So they're just
right?
trying to figure out the timing, and there might be a window somewhere ahead of us where that is like,
Well, and I think if they can make Taiwan more economically linked with China of the world, I, I think there's every time Taiwan has an election, it's close between the let's partner with China and let's make sure we stay separate. It's in that 60-40 kind of range. So if China is successful in economically linking more with Taiwan, Taiwan could just kind of lay down the arms at some point in time.
hmm.
It's not 90-10. It's not 90% of Taiwan is like, hell no, we don't want China. It's more like in that 60-40 range, and I think it kind of moves depending upon the mood of the country.
Yeah.
I don't think China would try to do it by force. I don't see any upside to that. Because again, 8,000-year history, they know Taiwan is going to become part of China at some point in time. That's what they feel in their heart. So I don't think they're going to shoot, but it's
Probably better to make sure that they don't feel like it's a good option.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think they we can be firm in our support of Taiwan.
Hmm.
I also don't think they believe on the other side. I don't think they believe we'll actually put aircraft carriers in harm's
Stick
way.
our necks out completely. Yeah. No, I think the countries, the Japan is the one that has strong feelings about the whole thing at this point, and maybe they can't just say, "Well, I think we'll just stay on our side of the Pacific," because they're there, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that you realize when you're there, we talk about racism here in the United States. It's nothing compared to Asia,
I know. Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's like they really because again, World War II to them, 8,000 years. World War II is like 10 minutes ago
Yeah.
to them, and all the atrocities that the Japanese did, the occupation of Taiwan, the fighting with China, all that stuff. That's like very very real, and they really really hate each other to a level that we can't even quite get our heads around.
Yeah.
Um, and the only way you understand it is just by being there.
So, just shifting gears here, because I
Yeah,
did want to. First of all, do you think we've had enough wildfires that they're going to start listening to that story you used to talk about managing forests? I loved that because you also talked about this great renewable resource. And you described it all in abstract terms, how you could grow them
I know.
and you could turn them into all these different things. And if you manage it, you don't have to let it all burn.
I know.
Um,
I
when
did.
are we going to have enough wildfires that they decide to maybe do the right thing?
I actually told that story at the Sierra Club debate, and I was amazed that they didn't catch on because I said, "Hey, I'm a technology guy, right? And I've come across this great new technology that it's completely renewable, right?
Organic. Yeah.
It's completely organic. It's a device that you just put like on an open part of the ground, and what it does is rain that falls on it, it absorbs that rain. You don't have to like pump water into it or anything else. It's completely solar powered. And in one side, it takes in air, just air, and out the other side, it extracts this. It produces this very dense material where it's sequestered all the CO2 from that air, and it makes a product that you can slice and laminate and do things, and you can build stuff out of it, and it's just incredible. And they were like, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, that's a tree, right?
Yeah, and
That's
it's
what trees
and it
do."
just puts out
And,
oxygen into
and
the
the
air.
only byproduct is oxygen. That's
Yeah.
right. Right?
I know, it sounds
That's
so
a
good.
tree.
Yeah.
Giddy up. Let's do more with trees.
Well,
I
and it seems like we're still in the same place we were 10, 15 years ago in terms of forest management, which,
oh
um how come the Weyerhaeuser forests aren't burning to the ground?
yeah, right. Well, the other thing is, Kevin, when we had our really bad fires a couple of years ago, I put together a little video, and there is a real time satellite. I can't remember the website, but there's real time satellite information that shows infrared photography of basically the whole United States.
Mhm.
So instantly, you can see when a fire starts from the satellite,
Yeah.
right? Through the clouds, everything else. So you could get a bunch of, it wouldn't even be a lot, a few 747s, fill them up with water the way they do. And the governor says, look, we need to get our forest management practices in shape. But until that point in time, I'm declaring a state of emergency, and every fire that starts in these regions, you can define the regions. I don't care if it's on state land, federal land, private land, I'm putting out the fire. Right? We're
Yep.
just, and while it's small, We just nuke it. We just go over, boom, put out the fire. And after you do that for a while, people are going to say, maybe this governor is really serious about this, and we need to sit down and we need to come up with some solutions, because the technology exists today to do it. And the
Yeah.
fact that nobody does it, it's kind of beyond your imagination.
Yeah. Yeah. And the byproduct of the forest fires,
Oh,
the wildfires, not only destruction of property, people losing their homes, but it's also an enormous amount of real pollution, not to mention the CO2 that, everybody says, well, that's really bad, but it's soot and stuff that you don't want to breathe.
yep,
And
totally.
it affects people's allergies and asthma. Uh,
Remember the biscuit fire that we had a few years ago?
yep.
Yeah, so I calculated that was 6 years of all of the cars' emissions in Oregon.
One fire.
One fire, 1 year, 6 years of all the cars.
Wow.
And this is the thing where it's like, look, do you really want to reduce CO2, or is this just a way of managing some agenda where you want Oregon to be one giant national park with coffee houses connected by light rail?
Yeah, well, and I think actually some of them think that latter sounds really good, but
Well, your actions mean that you want one giant national park with coffee houses connected by light rail,
yeah.
because it doesn't, the policies don't make sense.
Speaking of policies that don't make sense, you and I once some years ago talked about I remember you said you were kind of concerned that this Portlandia show, which was all the rage and kind of, you know, entertaining to watch. It was a couple of Saturday Night Live comedians that came out and pretended to be various different roles. They do skits of what that would illustrate the funny stuff that's largely true about or was largely true
Right.
about Portland. You remember the bumper stickers, "Keep Portland Weird." I remember you're like, I don't know if this is going to be good for attracting business to the Portland metro area. And you asked me if I thought this is going to be ultimately a negative thing. I think we'd all kind of like to go back to the days when Portland was
Yeah.
just Portlandia and weird.
Right. No, just quirky little Portland would be fine right now. Right. I drove all across the country last summer, and uh, everywhere I'd go, I'd meet people, and they'd say, "Where are you from?" And I'd kind of go, "Am I really going to tell them?" Okay, I'm from Portland, Oregon, and they go, "You are?" And I say, "Yes," and they say, "Is it as bad as what we see on the news?" And I said, "Actually, in most cases, I'd say the news is sort of hyperbole of what the." And I say it's actually worse, especially the filth and litter and drugs and homelessness. It's because you see it on the news and you naturally assume, oh, they've cherry
Yeah, it's
picked,
just
right?
pockets. Yeah.
It's just one little pocket and you film it, and it's like, no, you 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 cannot conceive of how pervasive it is in the city. It could be almost
Yeah.
anywhere in the city. And when you travel to other cities, I traveled through all kinds of Tulsa, Nashville, Chicago, even Chicago, where they claim they have a horrible homeless problem in Chicago. And I was driving on Route 66, and Route 66 does not go through the nicest sections of many of these
Right.
cities because it's the old 2-lane
Yep.
highway. Um, I took lots and lots of pictures of places where you expect to see homeless camps under viaducts and that sort of thing. I didn't see any, almost nothing on the entire trip until I got home, and uh, it was really really shocking. And because we live here, and you sort of have become numb to it, going to a Timbers game, you
Yeah.
know, and the my grandsons are kind of numb to it. It's just kind of the way it is. It's not acceptable. it's not the way a community should be run. It's not compassionate in any
Right. It's
way.
not charitable to either the people that are doing fentanyl all the time in the streets, which we've done this. A lot of this is, it's not just like it happened by accident. A lot of it's self-inflicted. It seems to be a phenomenon largely of the West Coast to the degree that it's this bad. And then we passed Measure 110, and
Yeah.
that was not only like a lot of people feel duped by that, but it seems like, well, we don't want to have the war on drugs anymore. So let's surrender and and see how bad it can get, and then have no treatment, which was promised. Um,
Right.
there are people around the world. I just read a story that in Scotland, they're quoting the new city councilor Renee Gonzalez, who replaced Joanne Hardesty, the one that
Right.
blamed the police for all the arsons by Antifa in 2020. And they're saying, look at Portland. Don't do this in Scotland.
Right.
It's-
Right. No, it's inconceivable to me that we've done what we've done. And I think as I talk to some of my friends in Multnomah County, Portland area, they can't admit that they've made a mistake.
Mm,
So the answer is, well, we just need more money. We just need more time. And we saw this in the last gubernatorial election where Christine Drazen came out citing all the problems that we have, potential solutions, that sort of thing. And I think Tina Kotek was a little bit on the defensive. And then finally, Kotek came out and said, yep, we got all these problems. Anybody can see it. We have all these issues. But who do you want to solve these problems?
mm,
Somebody that sides with Donald Trump or somebody with your values like me? And so there's no accountability that the principles and laws and infrastructure that has been put in place by 30 some years, 40 years of, in Portland, 50, 60 years of completely one party rule is going to change.
yeah.
And the people that have elected them, they're not saying, hey, what we need is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
They're just saying what we need is just more people like us doing better.
Yeah.
So, and I, if you talk to people, the amount of money that has been poured in, and the way the county fights with the city, fights with Metro, fights with, they're all climbing all over each other. There's no coordinated effort. It's the worst of the worst.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incompetent government added to bad policy without accountability. Yeah, it doesn't get, well, that's the trifecta, isn't it? And I mean, I'd like to be optimistic that actually this is the only way people figure out it's that bad and it needs to be fixed. But just one last thing, I know, and I really appreciate you staying here for the whole hour, because this is great. We've covered a lot of stuff, and it's been great to hear your perspective on all of this. We've got a GOP presidential race. We've got, there's going to be a general election next year. There's a president who I think might not, increasingly, even Democrats seem to realize he's not up to being president, maybe for much longer, much less 4 more years. What do you think? Do you think Biden's going to be the nominee? What percentage chances? And what do you think is going to happen in the Republican presidential primary?
I can't imagine that the Democrats let Biden be the nominee. But by the same token, I think they don't want to have a big mud wrestling match either. So if I was going to handicap it, and this is, complete speculation, is they'll move forward with Biden de facto. At some point in time, Biden drops out. Probably at a point in time that's late enough that the only way to pick a candidate is at their convention.
Mm-hmm.
So then you go to a brokered convention, which is something the Democrats are really good at dealing
Yeah.
with. And they hand pick their person to take the nomination. And it's all going to be based on polling. You know, can Kamala Harris beat Donald Trump? Or if Donald Trump can't do it, can Kamala Harris beat XYZ Republican?
Yeah.
And if she can't, then it's Gavin Newsom or some similar. But I can't imagine that. Can you imagine Biden in a debate?
Now he can't even, like yesterday he was in Vietnam and he just talked about going to bed, and he's in Alaska on 9/11. He can't even find his way off a stage. He would be a disaster in a debate. It really also seems like Kamala seems to have lower poll numbers than him, which is amazing.
Right.
She was laughing at and giggling at the 9/11 commemoration, which has just seemed very odd, but she does that.
Right.
And there's a sense too that I think Biden is going to be a pincushion, right? So many things are happening. Right? The real evidence is now coming forward, like actual emails that he sent or was on.
Yeah.
He's going to be like absorbed all this damage, and then when it's the right time, they just say, "Okay, you're out. All the damage leaves with you," and then we get somebody who's squeakier and cleaner.
Well, I always say if the Democrats can do it to John Kitzhaber, the most powerful political figure, like in, I don't know how long in Oregon, maybe forever, right? A 3-term governor, newly elected. If the Democrats can take out John Kitzhaber for what he did, they can take out Joe Biden.
Yeah.
They'll figure out a way to take him out.
And they just flip a switch and say, media, go.
Right. Here's a new one. On the Republican side, it's really interesting. I think Vivek Ramaswamy has some real interesting appeal from the standpoint that he sort of stands for some of the same things that Trump does in terms of the government's out of control. We got to do something about it. We need smaller, more accountable government. But he's very thoughtful in how he's gone about it, and he can articulate why and what he would do. Now, I think too young, not enough life experience. His company that he built, it's incredibly clever what he's done, but it's very much sort of biotech financial engineering.
Yeah.
Very, very, very esoteric what he's done. It's not like he built widgets or created Tesla or something that's rather straightforward.
Built tall buildings and hotels, and yeah.
No. But I think he's going to be an interesting curiosity as we go forward, something that's completely different than the others, and has a lot more, I'd say, traction than who is the guy in the Democratic field?
RFK Jr.
No, I like him too, actually. Yeah. And the reason I like him, I don't agree necessarily with his conclusions, but he's thoughtful.
And I think he's honest. He says what he really thinks.
And he's independent thinking, right? And he's telling you what's on his mind. It's not fabricated.
It's not double speak.
Like,
it's none of that.
No. So I actually, and my Democratic friends just hate him. They can't stand it.
That's something. Right?
Yeah. So anyway, it'll be interesting.
And I think there's it's impossible to predict. Like if we were trying to predict in 2019 what was going to happen in 2020, we all would certainly look like fools, right?
Yeah.
So we don't know what's going to happen. But thank you for your insights on that. I mean, I'm great to have you back and talk about some more of this closer to when we get later in the political process. You've seen it.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
You've seen conventions, that's for sure. You and I were there, and this could be a really interesting year coming up as well. Well,
yeah, maybe we could do a live and do some convention coverage.
That'd be great. That'd be fun. Yeah, and it's something people who haven't been to a convention can't always understand. So we could kind of bring that out, I think, too. Well,
Yeah.
thanks, Alan. This has been really great.
Okay.
Thanks for taking the time to be here today, and thanks everyone for watching us here. We enjoy bringing this show to you here, and so please share it with everyone you can. And we look forward to the next time we can have Alan on. Good luck with everything, Alan, and in
Thanks,
your
Claire.
pursuits there, and with your grandkids who we had on the promo photo, which is great. And everyone, please join us again tomorrow night for another episode of The Captive Audience. It's going to be David Darnell, and then we haven't figured out the rest yet, but we always make sure it's topical and interesting every day. Have a great night, everyone, and we'll talk to you again soon.